All right, sixth grade. We are going to finish up the book today. The Founding Fathers book about the Constitution. Give me just a second to find the exact page that we ended on. There we go. George Washington, first president. 6 months after the Constitution was ratified, that means it's approved, the process of electing the first president began. The election was held over 27 days from December the 15th, 1788 to January the 10th, 1789. Remember, this is back when things would not have happened electronically, would not have happened quickly, so it would have taken a while to get every information out to everybody that the election was taking place and where it was, and then to get everything put back up, gather all the votes gathered back up. Only one candidate. Unlike a modern-day presidential election, and where there are several candidates to choose from, the election had only one candidate, George Washington, the hero of the American Revolutionary War. He had presided over the 1787 Constitutional Convention, had signed the Constitution, and he had helped in the lengthy process of ratifying it, or remember, ratify means approve. With that work over, Washington had hoped to retire to his Mount Vernon farm in Virginia, but his role in the forming of the country had been so important that all eyes were on him to become the nation's first president. As expected, Washington won the election. And how should a president be addressed? It was soon decided that President Washington should be greeted as Mr. President. It set the style that's used to this day. Going back to the whole thing of we didn't want the guy that was in charge to have too much power. We obviously weren't going to bow down to him. We weren't going to call him a king. So how should he be addressed? And so it was decided he'd be called Mr. President. After he was elected, Washington traveled from Mount Vernon to New York. Because remember, New York is the first capital. So that's where he would go, is to the capital, New York. And along the way, people came out to greet him. He crossed the Hudson River in a specially built barge decorated in red, white, and blue, then made his way to Federal Hall on Wall Street in New York. There on April 30th, 1789, he stood on the balcony and was sworn in or inaugurated as the first president of the United States. He was indeed, in every sense of the words, a wise, a good, and a great man. That's what Thomas Jefferson said about him. Lasting legacy. George Washington proved to be an excellent first president. His presidential powers were laid out in the Constitution, and he followed them carefully. By doing this, he set a good example for all later presidents to follow and earned respect for the U.S. from world powers such as Great Britain, France, and Spain. In 1791, he helped choose a site for the nation's new capital. The city was to be built along the Potomac River and was named Washington in his honor. Whiskey Rebellion. The first real test for the new governor came in 1794 when farmers in Pennsylvania began a rebellion. They were unhappy about having to pay a new tax on alcohol, and when government officials tried to collect the money, the farmers attacked them. After President Washington ordered 13,000 troops into the area from neighboring states, the farmers withdrew and the rebellion came to an end. It showed the power of the national government and the authority of the president as leader of the nation. Final years. Washington was such a popular president that some people wanted him to carry on forever, but he couldn't. The Constitution fixed a president's term of office at 4 years, although at this point it didn't say how many times he could be reelected. Obviously, he could have been reelected more than 2 terms. He didn't want to be. He refused to be elected for a 3rd term. He didn't even try to get elected for a 3rd term, and retired in 1797. His last years were spent at his Mount Vernon home, where he died in 1799. Political parties emerge. All governments have people with strong views, and during Washington's presidency, this was no different. Toward the end of his first term, 2 of his most senior officials disagreed over how government should work. As the differences of opinion grew, the first political parties emerged: the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. Democratic Republicans have nothing to do with our party today of Democrats and Republicans. This was just what the original parties were called. The Federalists versus the Democratic Republicans were your 2 parties. Washington urged them not to develop political parties. He said that try to stay away from political parties, but that didn't work out. We ended up with the two political parties. And here are the leaders of the political parties. Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. An old argument. Washington was disappointed that Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson disagreed so strongly. Their argument was getting more heated and the issue wasn't going away. In fact, it had been around for a long time and was now splitting the government in two. The question of how much power the government should have had already been raised drafting the Constitution and during its ratification, and yet it was still not resolved. When Washington gave his farewell address in 1796 at the end of his second term, he warned against the creation of political factions, political parties, but by then it was too late. The Federalist Party. Alexander Hamilton became the leader of the Federalist Party, which was formed in 1791. Hamilton believed in a strong and powerful national government. That's where you get the whole Federalist Party. They wanted a strong federal or national government. Federalists believed the government should take responsibility for the debt from the Revolutionary War, should raise money through taxes, should create a central bank, and give favorable treatment to American shipping and merchants. Democratic Republican Party was led by Thomas Jefferson. He became the leader of the Democratic Republican Party. It was formed in 1792 as an opposition to the party of the Federalists. Jefferson was opposed to an all-powerful national government. His greatest fear was that ordinary Americans would lose their liberty, that they would not be listened to. Republicans, as they were known, believed national government had too much power. The president could start to act like a king or a dictator. A federalist government favored the rich at the expense of the poor, and that education was the key to improving people's lives. A political cartoon attacking Thomas Jefferson. Here's the political cartoon. The providential detection. The providential detection, a political cartoon attacking Thomas Jefferson. It shows him kneeling before an altar on top of which a fire burns. Jefferson is about to throw the U.S. Constitution onto the fire, but he's stopped from doing so by an American eagle. Alexander Hamilton, government official. Alexander Hamilton rose from a humble background to become one of the founding fathers of the U.S. He helped to draft the Constitution, became the first Secretary of the Treasury, and laid the foundations for a strong economy. Should have notes in there about what the first two parties are. Should have notes that Hamilton was the first Secretary of the Treasury. Hamilton was born in 1757 on Nevis, a small island in the Caribbean Sea that belonged to Britain. He had a talent for math and particularly for bookkeeping, keeping an accurate record of the money passing through a business. For a time, while still in his teens, he was the manager of a training company. Then at 15, he was sent to America to study. Hamilton arrived in America in 1772, just at the time when people were talking about breaking away from England. He was in support of America's freedom and described his ideas in pamphlets that were widely read. During the American Revolutionary War, Hamilton served as one of General George Washington's most senior advisors. After the war, he became a spokesman for the state of New York. He was in favor of a strong national government and was one of the 39 delegates who signed the Constitution in 1787. By writing articles as part of the Federalist Papers, Hamilton helped win support for the Constitution during its ratification process. In 1789, President Washington appointed Hamilton the first Secretary of the Treasury. His job was to deal with the finances of the new nation. He wanted to raise enough money through taxation, which would pay off the debts of the Revolutionary War. He wanted the government to create a central bank and give help to American businesses. These were bold ideas that Hamilton believed would make a strong national government. Yet they went too far for some politicians. A split appeared in Washington's government, out of which came the first two parties. Duel to the death. Hamilton's number one political enemy was Aaron Burr, who was at the time Vice President of the United States. The men had clashed in debate several times, but things boiled over in 1804. Hamilton stated that Burr was not to be trusted with the reins of government, and in response, Burr challenged Hamilton to a duel. The pair faced each other at dawn on July the 11th, 1804. Pistol shots rang out. Hamilton's bullet snapped a branch above Burr's head, because people believe that he purposely shot over Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr, on the other hand, actually shot toward Hamilton and killed Hamilton, and Hamilton died the next day. Building the new capital. Every nation has a capital city. The capital of the U.S. is Washington, D.C., named after George Washington. On July 9th, Congress passed the Resident Act, which approved the creation of a national capital on the Potomac River. It was to be built in what was then the middle of the country. We talked about this. Maryland and Virginia had donated land for the capital, and to avoid either state claiming that Washington was within their boundaries, the capital was given its own territory, named District of Columbia, which was referencing Christopher Columbus. The city was to be built in a square with 10-mile-long sides. The key buildings of the government would be built within its borders. Before anything could be built, the land had to be surveyed. A team of surveyors marked out the boundaries of the new capital, placing sandstone boundary markers every mile along the sides of the square. Washington was laid out in a grid pattern of streets. The city plan was designed by Pierre Charles L'Enfant. In early 1791, President Washington appointed Pierre Charles L'Enfant, a civil engineer, to draw up a plan for the capital. Born in France, he moved to America when he was in his 20s. In the plan, Washington was to have a grassy mall or a grassy area running through its center, which we do. That mall is what connects between the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument. But they put a reflecting pool in that mall, or that grassy area. On either side would be rectangular city blocks with wide avenues. Among the key buildings would be the President's House, which later became known as the White House after the War of 1812. And a building for the government to meet in, the Capitol. John Adams, when he was president, said, "I pray heaven to bestow the best of blessings on this house and all that shall hereafter inhabit it. May none but honest and wise men ever rule under this roof." Even though George Washington is the one that hired the city planner and everything, he never actually lived in the White House. John Adams did, though. Here's a picture of the original Capitol. First picture taken of it. It's not a great picture because they put other pictures in front of it. The White House. James Hoban, an Irish architect living in Philadelphia, won the competition to design the president's home. President Washington took great interest in the design and insisted that it was faced with sandstone. The first stone was laid in 1792, and after 8 years of building, President John Adams, our second president, became the first president to live there. The Capitol. The winning design for the government headquarters came from William Thornton. He had studied medicine in Scotland before moving to America, where he worked as an architect. The foundation stone for the Capitol was laid in 1793. Very slowly, the building began to rise until in 1800 it was used for the first meeting of Congress. Construction work continued and changes were made to the design. One of the biggest changes came in 1855 when work began to build the huge dome that is known the world over today. And here's a picture of the United States Capitol. Amending the Constitution. It can be very difficult to get a group of people to all agree on the same thing. This is just what happened during the ratification or approval process when the 13 original states discussed the Constitution. Some states argued that it needed changing, while others were satisfied with it. A living document. The Constitution has been called a living document or a work in progress. It's a way of saying that it can be changed, so it lives and grows as America changes through time. Right from the start, there were calls for change. During the ratification process, more than 200 changes to the Constitution were proposed by the states. James Madison reviewed them all. He took out the proposals that he and President Washington thought were against the interests of the new government. Madison was left with a list of 12 changes or amendments called for by the states. Bill of Rights. On September 15th, 1791, the states agreed to 10 of the 12 amendments on Madison's list. 2 were rejected. The amendments were added to the Constitution and are known as the Bill of Rights. They are designed to protect the rights of individual American people and place limits on the power of both the national and state government. And you can see here a picture of them meeting about it. James Madison addressing the Virginia Constitutional Convention at Richmond. Madison, who was then almost 80, spoke against giving slaves in Virginia the right to vote. George Mason said, "I wish the plan was prefaced with a Bill of Rights, and I would second a motion if made for the purpose. It would give great quiet to the people." There was a commemorative $5 coin featuring James Madison on the front and the Bill of Rights on the back. The nation grows. Basically just talks about how the nation grows. The one thing I think is cool is the flags. Let me see if I can hold it and show you. The first flag in 1776 with the 13 stars. Texas flag, 19th century, 15 stars. Flag of the Battle of Bennington, 1777, with 13 stars. Flag of 1959 has 19 stars. Flag of 1781 with 13 stars. And flag of 1960 has all 50 stars. New states are admitted to the Union. Kentucky was the 15th one, Tennessee the 16th one. John Adams is our second president. He's one of the nation's founding fathers. John Adams helped draft the Declaration of Independence. He was a diplomat, served as President George Washington's vice president, and became the nation's second president in 1797. He was born in 1735 in Massachusetts, became a successful lawyer in Boston, and when England increased the tax paid by her American colonies, he spoke out against it. He was a leading delegate at the First and Second Continental Congresses, where he called for America to break away from England. During the American Revolutionary War, he was a diplomat in France and Holland. After the war, he led the American delegation to Paris, where the peace treaty was signed. In 1789, Adams became a vice president. Under President George Washington, he was America's first vice president. He soon discovered that the vice president had no real power and described the job as the most insignificant office. He found it a frustrating experience, but he did his duty until 1797. After 8 years as vice president, he became the nation's second president in 1797. Immediately, he had to deal with an international crisis. England and France were at war, and French warships were attacking U.S. ships to prevent them from trading with Britain. President Adams ordered warships to be built, which became the first ships in the U.S. Navy, hence the reason they call him the father of the Navy. They sank several French ships, and until in 1800, Adams brought an end to the conflict. That same year, Adams and his family moved to their new home, the White House. He was the first president to live there. Abigail Adams, First Lady. They were married in 1764. She ran the family farm, brought up their children, and took care of her husband's business affairs. She was interested in politics and held strong opinions on many political issues. For example, she was against slavery. Adams hoped to be reelected as president for a second term, but he ended up being defeated by Thomas Jefferson. And then you have Thomas Jefferson, who's third president. Of course, he's known for drafting the Declaration of Independence. And you have the Louisiana Purchase, which is way farther down the line from what we're going to talk about right now. And that is the end of the Founding Fathers. So remember, you should have typed up notes as you were listening to me read the book. There's some specific questions I asked that you definitely need to have on there. And then attach those notes on today's assignment. I don't remember if you have simple. I think you have simple solutions. Yes, you should have a simple solutions lesson to check today. Yes, you do. Have a great weekend. Miss seeing you all, and I will see you on Monday.